Welcome into the PFN Bengals podcast. I am Dallas Robinson. He is Jay Morrison. Jay, the Bengals are unfortunately 0-2 again to start the season after their Week 2 loss to the Chiefs. Close game. We're a few days removed from that game now. Bengals are kind of back in the same position they've been in. It's not necessarily unexpected. I don't know that a lot of us necessarily thought the Bengals were going to beat Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City in Week 2, but they did play well. They did make it close. It came down to a last-second field goal. I think there are a lot of positive takeaways we can take away from that game going into Week 3, and that's what we're going to dive into on today's show. Jay, first and foremost, how are you doing today?
Yeah, doing good. Feels weird being so late in the week and recording this, but the Monday night game kind of pushes everything back. And yeah, we are going to kind of focus on the positive because, there's been so much written about 0-2, 3 years in a row and all that. But, you always have to put that disclaimer in that it's not a moral victory. Nobody's happy with the way they played, that they lost that game. But you do have to look at growth from Week 1 to Week 2. And I think we saw a lot of it. And I think we saw a lot of it in some important areas. So that's what we need to do is go over where we see this team moving in the right direction and why you should believe that this can be another case where they can dig themselves out of 0-2 and finish above 500 and or in the playoffs.
Losing to the Patriots in Week 1, I think, is a different ball game entirely than losing to the defending Super Bowl champions by 1 point in Week 2. So I think, yes, it's a loss, but going into the positive, I think, is probably the way to go because they did look much better than they did in Week 1. I think it's hard to argue that they didn't. Let's start with, I think, what's the most important position on the team in quarterback, and Joe Burrow. I thought Joe Burrow looked far more comfortable than he did in Week 1. He looked, I don't want to say like a totally different quarterback, but much more closer to the guy we've seen in the past that's willing to rip throws, that's willing to go downfield. His average depth of target went from 5.9 yards in Week 1, which is 28th among all quarterbacks, to 7.5 yards. Not a huge jump, but he was up to 18th in Week 2. When he was kept clean, that difference was even more stark, right? He went from 4.5 yards in Week 1 to 8 in Week 2. So he was going a little more down the field than he was in Week 1. Bengals, I think it's interesting, are also, they're not going away from the pass. They are number 1 in pass rate over expectation through 2 weeks by a pretty big margin. So the Bengals don't have any concerns about what Joe Burrow is able to do. They're not going away from the pass anytime soon. They're still willing to rip it. For me, that was the most important takeaway, that Joe Burrow looked at least closer to the guy that we've come to know.
Yeah, and not everybody focuses on how his throws look and how deep they go and how far outside the numbers they go. I watched that game and I didn't see a quarterback that was worried about his wrist at all based on the way he was running with the ball, the way he was taking off and not sliding. You slide, that's easy to keep your hands up and not worry about bracing for a fall and protecting the wrist. I mean, he was lowering his shoulder and probably doing some things you would wish your quarterback wouldn't do, but, fighting for extra yards. And that sneak down at the goal line, he got blown up and lost his helmet on that play and stayed right in there, shook it off. So I think he's playing fearless right now, and I think that's the most important thing. Yes, I think there's still some room for growth in the wrist, and I think we are going to see them get more aggressive just as he gets a little more comfortable and as T. Higgins comes back and helps loosen up these defenses. But I thought that Burrow's play overall, the way he threw the ball, the way he ran the ball, the way he processed, everything was so much better. And everybody focuses on the Chiefs and Mahomes, and that's a really good defense and Chris Jones at the heart of it. And I thought they did a good job. I thought they looked like the better team for most of that game. It just didn't finish. And the one run, Burrow loses the fumble. That can't happen. I still haven't seen a good replay that shows whether it was or not. I think the refs were as confused as anybody, and because they didn't throw the beanbag until the ball was already being taken back the other way. And I think it was just that thought process of, okay, if you call the fumble, then it has to be reviewed. If we call him down, then the Chiefs have to use a challenge to challenge it. And so I think it was just kind of that leaning back on that, okay, we'll know what automatically get reviewed if it's called a fumble. But from the replays in the press box and watching from way up high, the highest press box in the league, it was really hard to see whether it actually was a fumble or not, but it was called that, and he's just got to be more secure. That's the 11th lost fumble he's had, and the Bengals are 2-9 in games when Burrow loses a fumble.
It's really hard to win against Patrick Mahomes when you give up free points like that, and it was really impressive to see Burrow do this against a Steve Spagnuolo defense. That Steve Spagnuolo is maybe the best like single game planner in the NFL. So to do this against a defense like the Chiefs, I think was really impressive. And we'll get into Washington here in a little bit, but it's safe to say this Washington defense is nowhere near the Chiefs in terms of talent. So I think if Burrow in this offense can look this good against a Chiefs defense that I would put easily top 5, if not higher in the league, I mean, I think Bengals fans are going to be pretty happy with what this offense can do against a Washington defense that gave up over 500 points last season, by far the most in the league. So we liked how Burrow looked. Jay, what else did you like from week 2 against the Chiefs? Give me another positive from last week's win or last week's loss. God, in my mind, it's a not to do a moral victory, but it is almost a little bit of a win to come that close to the Chiefs. But from last week's loss,
yeah, I love the way that they're leaning into the 12 personnel and how much they used it and how successful it was and what it led to. And it's what you have to do. And they were forward thinking in this. Everybody's talking now. What's going on? Not enough passing touchdowns. Everything's down. Everybody's playing too high. The Bengals saw this coming. They didn't need to see the first 2 weeks results to know that this is the way the league was going. And defenses are just going to make you work your way up the field and run the ball. And so they were aggressive, and they used 2 middle round picks on tight ends. They brought Drew Sample back, went out and got Mike Gesicki in free agency. I think you're seeing a plan come to fruition. And I really like what I'm seeing from Eric All. I think he's going to have a very impressive year. He's not going to be Pro Bowl, anything like that. The targets just aren't going to be there. But the way he blocks, and they lined him up in the backfield, him and Sample both lined up as like H-backs a couple times or fullbacks. And I just think there's a lot there to force teams out of that too high, or just burn them over and over again with the underneath stuff and go in 12 personnel and run the ball. And it's leading to one of my other points I'll get to after this one. But the most snaps that they've played in a game in 12 personnel, and for people that aren't versed, it's one tight end and it's 2 tight ends and 1 running back. And typically they're in 11, 1 running back, 1 tight end, then you got 3 wide receivers out there. So going bigger, going with the 2 tight ends, they did that for 19 plays Sunday. It's the 3rd most in the Zach Taylor era. They had 34 way back in 2019 in a game against New England, and they had 25 in that Burrow Bowl that went way into overtime in 2019 at Miami. So those are the only 2 games when they ran more snaps. And in terms of percentage, 54% in that New England game was crazy. 31.1% Sunday against Chiefs, 2nd highest of any Zach Taylor game. Just ahead of the Von Bell, Juju Smith-Schuster game against Pittsburgh in 2020, that Burrow Bowl. And then number 5 on the list, week 1 this year against New England, 29.2%. So you see where this is going, and I expect to see it stay where it's at, or maybe even lean into it further.
31.1% 12 personnel rate, 6th highest in the league in week 2. So like they're just in terms of NFL wide, they are really leaning into this. 11 dropbacks, 8 rushes, 55% success rate throwing. League average dating back to 2023 is about 46%, 62.5% success rate running. The league average on that's about 45% going back to last year. So they're really, really getting some yardage here. Mike Gesicki, man, oh my God, he's at 35.1% targets per route run so far. So just imagine how many for every route that he runs, how often is he getting the ball? He's getting the ball about 35% of the time he runs a route. That's 2nd in the entire NFL behind Cooper Kupp through 2 weeks. So he has become a real favorite target for Joe Burrow through 2 weeks. You mentioned Eric All. I just continue to be impressed by this guy for a rookie tight end to be playing this well. And again, you're like you said, he's not going to be an all pro, but for a rookie mid-round tight end who dealt with injuries, who got a late start in the summer, to come in and look like he just belongs in the NFL from day one, I think is really impressive, right? He played about a quarter of the snaps in week 1. He went to about half in week 2. I think you're totally right, Jay, that they are going to keep leaning into this, and whether it's running, whether it's throwing, whether it's mixing in play action, there's all sorts of stuff I think you can do when you start mixing up your formations and your looks. Yeah. What this looks like when T. Higgins comes back, when you've got Higgins and Chase split out wide, plus the 2 tight ends. I think there's a lot of different things the Bengals are going to be able to do out of these looks, and the success that they've already shown is kind of proof of concept for them moving forward.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder, do they I mean, Yoshivas had 2 touchdowns, but those were his only 2 catches for 7 yards.
Yeah.
And I wonder, when Higgins does come back, is it going to be more of Higgins chasing Gesicki in the slot as opposed to Andre in the slot, and maybe not use him as much as it seemed like they were intending to early on? One of the other positives I had was Gesicki. I don't know if you want to wait on what I have on him or just because we're in 12 personnel discussion.
No, give me Gesicki. Give me your Gesicki stuff.
So he had 9 targets on Sunday. That's tied for the most by a tight end in the Joe Burrow era. Sample had 9 in Burrow's second career start up in Cleveland. That was a Thursday night game. And then Hayden Hurst had 9 in a 2022 game down at Tennessee. So that says a lot right there that he's going to the tight end a lot more. The Bengals tight ends had 111 yards at halftime of that game. The record in the Burrow era was 101. So they beat the record by halftime. They finished with 151. Gesicki finished with 7 catches. It should have been 8. That drop ball in the sun was such a killer. He talked about that on Monday, just how it was so hard to see. And he's like, he never tries to body catch, but he felt like he had to because of the way he wasn't seeing the ball that well on that play. And just a brutal drop. Still 7 catches by a tight end. That's tied with Sample for the most by a Bengals tight end in the Burrow era. So, and then Gesicki had 91 yards, and that's tied for the second most in the Burrow era. CJ Uzama had 95 in a Thursday night win against Jacksonville. So you see, again, where this is going. That's why they went out and got a Mike Gesicki, because he is such a weapon, like on the 4th down, the 4th and 4, when the crosser and he gets 37 yards. We haven't seen a lot of it. We did see it in week 1, the red zone factor that he can be, although he dropped that ball, the play was overturned. But I think you're going to see his role keep increasing in this as well. Just because they are going to go lean into 12 more, and like you pointed out with those stats, just because they're in 12 doesn't mean they're running the ball. They're still dropping back quite a bit and making teams pay. So I really like where this offense is going with the 12 personnel and with how they're using Gesicki early on.
Yeah, I think, the whole discussion around the NFL is why is passing down. And I think the easiest explanation is just defensive coordinators leaning into these 2 high shells. And if defenses are going to keep doing that, then offenses are going to have to punish them by running the ball. And I think you're right that the Bengals were out in front on this. And I think we'll continue to see that. I think elsewhere on offense, I did want to bring up Jermaine Burton. I mean, a 47-yard bomb in week 2. You continue to see that he does have that explosive ability. If the Bengals are going to lean into 12 personnel, that obviously means less snaps, less looks for some of their other tertiary receivers. But I do think it's probably time that Burton is seeing more time over Trenton Irwin at this point. I mean, Trenton Irwin has 1.4 yards per target on 8 targets. He just hasn't done that much. I know it's only a 2-game sample, but we kind of know what Trenton Irwin is at this point. And I do think if the Bengals are going to be hunting for explosives, which, with the way defenses are playing, you kind of have to come up with these either designed plays to go for explosive or have a guy like Burton who can just get free down the sideline. I think that he should be in there more than Trenton Irwin. And I wouldn't be surprised if moving forward that Burton is in there for whether it's select packages or select formations, that he is in there as, all right, when we need an explosive play, this is the guy we could at least try and get the ball to.
Yeah, and what he needs to do is he really needs to focus on his run blocking and being aggressive there, because you can't just bring him in and telegraph, okay, this is going to be a play action deep shot, because that's the only time we use him. So they need to get him out on the field more. And like they did in week 1, 3 of his 4 snaps were run plays. So get him out there, see what he can do as a blocker. Can you trust him? And then you can feel more comfortable, put him on the field more, where you can play off of the run game and the 12 personnel and do some more play action stuff.
Exactly. Did you have any more positives on offense, Jay, before we turn to defense?
I do, actually. Is the Bengals offensive line good? I mean, they've given up 3 sacks in the first 2 games, but I've seen improved play, and I think it's only going to go to another level when Amarius Mims comes back and replaces Trent Brown. Maybe that's Monday night against Washington. Maybe it's next week at Carolina. Yeah. But I think a lot of people trust and respect ESPN's pass block, win rate, and their metrics there. They have the Bengals at number 5 in pass blocking win rate and number 5 in run blocking win rate. When was the last time you saw that they were top 5 in both of those? I I think it's moving in the right direction. It's not great.
Yeah.
It's not where you want it to be. Burrow's still taking hits, but it's been positive. And, Cordell Volson, he looked really good against New England. He looked really bad this past week against Kansas City, but a lot of people look bad against Chris Jones. So we'll see. You hope to see something closer to what you saw against New England from Volson this week against Washington.
Yeah, I think Volson, unfortunately, is always going to be the weak link on this unit. But yeah, you're right. Everyone struggles against Chris Jones. So I wouldn't say that's too much of a worry. I am interested to see when Mims gets in the lineup, and if it is on Monday night, would they do like a rotation at right tackle? I mean, that's something you watch around the league that other teams have been willing to do. The Commanders, who they're facing on Monday night, have done that at left tackle. They've got a 3rd-round pick named Brandon Coleman, who's seen some time at left tackle, but they've also got a veteran playing there too. Maybe if Mims is ready to go, maybe he comes in for a series or two. I don't know if the Bengals would be willing to do something like that, but I'm right there with you. I think that go back to how this offensive line looked when the Bengals were making their Super Bowl run compared to where it is now. It is just night and day. And I think it's by far the best line Joe Burrow has ever had in front of him. And I agree. I think through 2 games, they've been pretty impressive.
And Monday night would be the perfect time to get Amarius Mims in there and play some jumbo sets against a Washington defense that is in nickel 97.3% of the time. It's by far the highest rate of nickel defense in the league. The next closest team is at 87%. So get them out of what they want to do. Force them to put another linebacker on the field. That opens things up for Chase and for Higgins if he returns, or Yoshivas, or whoever's out there running routes, Burton. But that feels like the ideal way. And you ease him in at home. He's not dealing with crowd noise. And you see how he plays, and you see how Trent Brown plays, and then you evaluate, do you want to make that switch? Do you want to play Amarius Mims as your starter in week 4 at Carolina, where, yes, it's on the road? I don't think crowd noise is going to be an issue. There might be as many Bengal fans down there as there are Panthers fans. So it feels like it. He's been trending in the right direction. He's been doing more and more in practice. And I would think we would probably see him active this week, and then just get him in, get his feet wet, get him some snaps in those jumbo sets or in other situations.
I think that makes a lot of sense, especially because Washington does not really have a fearsome edge rusher. They've got a couple guys that Dan Quinn brought over from Dallas, Dorrance Armstrong, and a couple guys. But if you're going to put Mims in there in week 4 against Jadeveon Clowney, who I still think's got a lot of tools left in that bag, I think you want to get Mims on a couple plays on the field before you put him up against a guy like Clowney in week 4. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about the defense real quick. Big Lou Anarumo, back in his bag in week 2, held Patrick Mahomes to 151 passing yards, his lowest career total in an injury-free game. I mean, just really, really impressive stuff. I thought the tackling was much, much better. The Bengals went from 29th in yards after contact per rush to 7th in week 2. PFF only had them at 4 missed tackles after 13 last week. No individual player had more than 1 missed tackle. So this was not like, one guy missing a ton of tackles or anything like that. I just thought it was a really impressive showing. There are still some issues we can get into on the defense, but from Trey Hendrickson to Cam Taylor-Britt, who was PFF's #1 graded corner through 2 weeks, I just thought it was a really impressive showing against Patrick Mahomes and one of the best league's best offenses. And going forward against Washington, Carolina, New England, I mean, if the Bengals defense can do this against Mahomes, I think you have to have so much faith about what they're going to look like against some of the worst offenses in the league moving forward.
Yeah. Lou had it at 7 missed tackles, but for only 25 yards. So, half of the 14 that he had it at from the week before. But you don't feel the brunt of the missed tackles as much when you've got other guys rallying there, and maybe the runner slips one, but then there's another guy to bring him down a yard or 2 later. That's what they're trying to get to. So I thought that was much better. And how long have we talked about it, where the Bengals can't cover tight ends, and tight ends burn them time after time? Travis Kelce, 1 catch for 5 yards. That's a hell of a job. I don't care if he's getting older or not. That's impressive. Yeah. What they did, really, even just, Pacheco, we talked about, he's going to break tackles, and for them to have 7 for 25, I thought was really a positive. And you're always going to question that last 4th and 16 call by Lou to have a rookie and Dejon Anthony out there as opposed to Mike Hilton or even Jordan Battle has a little more experience. But I thought he just called a great game in terms of when to dial up the blitz, when to drop 8, keeping Mahomes off not off script, but just off guard, not
Yeah, a little
knowing what's coming.
uncomfortable.
And
Yeah.
and they got a little better supplemental pass rush. I mean, Trey Hendrickson still took that game over. They still need to get more. But, overall, very impressive game for Lou and the defense as a whole.
Trey Hendrickson, 25% pressure rate, tied for highest in the NFL through 2 weeks. I mean, he's just destroying people. You've written, Jay, that he's gotten 2 left tackles benched. He's gotten 1 considering retirement. And like we mentioned, he's going to go up against another questionable left tackle situation in week 3. I mean, I'm expecting another huge game. I was just very impressed by the defense overall, and I think that's a positive going forward. Any other positives, Jay, or should we get into the negatives now? Because there were a few. Do you have anything else you want to highlight?
I mean, it's hard to. I mean, just McPherson, that 53-yard field goal was so clutch. Where Chase has the horrible penalty, they do what they need to do to get back into field goal range, and Evan missed the extra point that he had made 44 in a row before that. So you can hammer a guy, but it's going to happen. Missed extra points are going to happen. But I thought that was really impressive, his game and the way they're just approaching this now and being smart. And 90% of their kickoffs have gone for touchbacks. Around the league, it's up there, but it's not like that. And I like what Darren's got going. I like what Evan's doing. We didn't really see a lot of Ryan Rico, which I guess is a good thing when you're playing Kansas City. But I would put Evan, despite the missed extra point, into one of those positive categories.
If we're going to talk negatives, I think there are a few. I'll start on offense. I think obviously we need to see more Jamar Chase. It's been frustrating so far. Just 4 catches for 35 yards on Sunday. Through 2 weeks, 15.5% targets per route run, 62nd among wide receivers. It's the lowest rate of his career through 2 weeks. I think you can explain that, right? There's no T. Higgins. These defenses are allowed to focus their energy on Jamar Chase. We saw it with the Chiefs. We saw it with the Patriots. There just wasn't a lot down the field. Again, I think that'll change once you start playing some of these defenses that just don't have the talent in the secondary that the Chiefs in New England do. And I think it'll change when T. Higgins gets back, when he offers another alternative that defenses are going to have to account for. I do think that'll open up some stuff for Jamar. But it is concerning that he hasn't really produced through 2 weeks. And I think you have to wonder, I think people are wondering, is it related to the contract? Is it related to any of the off-field stuff? I don't think so. Jamar's still giving 100% effort out there, at least as far as I can see on the tape. It's nothing like that. I think it's just kind of how he's being played and how this offense is being structured right now. I do expect it to change moving forward, though, and I'd be surprised. I'm not trying to predict anything, but I think Jamar is easily going to go for 100 yards against Washington. I'd be surprised if he doesn't.
Yeah, if you get Higgins back out there, that changes everything. Kansas City has always done the double-double plan against Chase and Higgins, and so with no Higgins, they were blanketing Jamar. I do think I don't think the contract's playing into how he's playing, but I think it's playing into how he's feeling. And I think he is frustrated because he hasn't got off to a great start. And he's frustrated because I'm sure he wanted to go out and prove something to him. Like, you're not going to give me a contract? Watch this. I deserve one. And he's not been able to do that. And nobody's saying the Bengals made the right move by not giving him a contract and waiting another year, but I'm sure it weighs on him. He's got that I'll show you mindset, and he hasn't really been able to do it yet. And I think that played into that penalty. I think there's just a lot of frustration building up in that guy, and it just all came spewing out in that one moment. You got to be above that. You have to be able to control your emotions on the field, especially when the referee gives you a beat. Like, he didn't throw the flag immediately. He let him have his say, and Jamar kept going. It's just a brutal penalty that can't happen. But I think that we are going to see him see his numbers start looking more like the Jamar numbers that we're used to seeing.
Give me another concern that you've got coming out of week 2, Jay. What else are you worried about on this Bengals roster?
Well, just the defensive line and as a whole. I mean, they went out and signed Lawrence Guy. It doesn't sound good for BJ Hill and Sheldon Rankins. They both left that game with hamstring injuries. We'll see. Today's the first practice of the week, so we'll see if they're able to do anything at all, if they're limited, if they're on the rehab field. But it's getting thin. They said there was one play or 1 point on Sunday where Zach Carter played 14 straight snaps. Defensive tackles do not play 14 straight snaps, and it was a great effort. And then they kicked Sam Hubbard inside. They did what they had to do, but Joseph Osai, according to PFF, pass rush win rate of 0 in that game. He played more snaps. He played 31 snaps as opposed to 13 in the opener, but he's got to find a way to get back there and supplement the pass rush with Hendrickson coming from the other side. You got to find a way to get some push up the middle. It's really concerning because J2 Fele is more of the typical nose guard. He's not going to give you a lot. Zach Carter still hasn't proved a whole lot. I'm interested to see if they call Dominique Davis up from the practice squad. He's flashed in preseason, but it's a big concern. And especially if you watch that Washington game, the way they ran Brian Robinson in that game, if you've got issues in the middle of your defensive line, it could be a long day.
There's a guy in Washington, a backup tight end named John Bates, who is a hell of a blocker, who was destroying 300-pound defensive tackles against the Giants. So the blocking, I think, from those guys will not be a concern in the run game. Yeah, I think the Bengals did better from a tackling perspective, but they were still third worst in the league in rushing success rate in week 2. It was not great on a down by down basis. You've got the injuries that you're dealing with now. It's getting very thin. Lawrence Guy is 34 years old. He didn't get any interest this offseason. He was a very good player 5 years ago. I just don't think that at this point you're really expecting much of an impact from him. I did an article yesterday looking at the Rams and whether they could maybe blow up a little bit of their roster after their poor start. They've got a defensive tackle on that roster, Jay, named Bobby Brown III, not the singer. This is a different guy. 24 years old. He's a pending free agent, 6'4", 330, lined up in the A gap 233 times last season, 8th most among all of defensive tackles. He only played 300 some snaps. So that was literally his only role, was blocking the A gap and being a big body. He was my trade candidate for the Bengals if they want to go out and get somebody. A pending free agent, still young, got the size. He's a guy I'd look into. Not expecting it. Bengals never trade, but I'm trying to help them out here. If they want to get another body, I do think he's a guy, but I think they've got to do something. I mean, if Hill and Rankins are both going to be missing for an extended period of time, I'm honestly just not sure what that interior is going to look like. It's a real mess. Yeah.
I mean, they're counting on Chris Jenkins. I think he's got a shot to play this week. And then McKinley Jackson, will be back in week 5 for Baltimore. So I don't know. It's quite push the panic button time, but yeah, that would be an interesting move. I mean, what, 5th, 6th round pick for a guy like that? And
yeah, I would think so.
It's not something I would expect the Bengals to do, but it is an interesting topic because, if you are concerned about what McKinley Jackson's timeline looks like, or even, you get those guys back. Let's not forget they're still rookies.
They're rookies.
And they look like rookies. Well, Chris Jenkins looked like a rookie at times in the preseason. McKinley didn't even get to play any preseason games. So he's way behind as it is. So yeah, and you don't know with BJ Hill and Sheldon Rankin, the hamstring injuries can linger for a long time and you can come back and you can re-aggravate them. So it could be something these guys are dealing with all year. So fortifying that position should be top of mind.
Let's go ahead and look at week 2 now. So we've got the Washington Commanders on deck. They're 1-1. They somehow beat the New York Giants on Sunday. They did not score a single touchdown. 7 field goals from Austin Seaver gives them the 2018 win. I watched that game, Jay. I mean, Jaden Daniels, number 2 overall pick. I will say that he looks comfortable. He does not look like the NFL is too fast for him, too big for him, anything like that. I really don't think that that's an issue. I think Cliff Kingsbury, though, who is Washington's offensive coordinator, is just doing a real disservice with Jaden Daniels. I mean, he's not giving them any chance to do anything down the field. Jaden Daniels is 33rd of 35 qualifying quarterbacks in air yards per attempt, just 5 yards per attempt. On average, his throws are coming up 5.2 yards short of the first down marker, which is the worst rate in the NFL. About a quarter of his dropbacks are screens. That's the 3rd highest rate. About 40% of Washington's wide receivers targets come behind the line of scrimmage. That's the worst rate in the league. It's the horizontal raid. I mean, that is what this offense is. From the Bengals' perspective, I think it's going to make tackling that much more important. If they look like they did in week 1 in terms of letting these guys catch the ball underneath and get yardage after the catch because they're missing tackles, that's going to be a real problem. I think they're going to have to be really clean with their tackling and get to these guys, rally and tackle. I think that'll be the defensive approach against this offense that tries to do everything underneath.
Yeah. And I mean, I agree with you. He does look comfortable. He looks fearless. Not to the point of being foolish. He's still smart about it, but he'll take off and go. Oh, yeah. And I'm mad. I'm kicking myself because I had a stat up that the league sent out, and now I can't find it, but it had to do with a passer rating over 90 and completion percentage over 70%. And Jaden Daniels has done that in each of his first 2 games. If he does it against the Bengals, he'll be the first rookie in NFL history to do that in his first 3 games. And if you just talking about any 3 games in a row, your rookie year, there's only 3 other guys that have ever done it. So he does. He has looked the best of all these rookie quarterbacks so far, and it's one of those things where if the Bengals are doing a good job and they're plastering in coverage, he's a real weapon that you have to account for and that can take off. And the other thing is, I just all of those short screen passes to the receivers, I think plays into the Bengals' strength, because Cam Taylor-Britt's a really good tackler. Dax Hill has been a really good tackler. He didn't have a good game in week 1 against New England, but it's his first game in a new position. So I think that does kind of play into their strength. And then I wonder, the real issue was with the screen game, and are they going to be throwing to Brian Robinson a lot? And that's not really the strong suit of Jermaine Pratt and Logan Wilson, of dropping in coverage and guarding the running backs. So I think a lot of people look at this, you see the 7.5 point spread, you think the Bengals should handle this team, but I do think that Washington poses some real problems in ways where the Bengals are having issues. And so I expect this to be a game closer than most people think.
Yeah, I think Jaden Daniels, the thing with him is, like, he rarely gets the ball off to his intended target. He has only gotten a pass off to a target on 30% of his dropbacks. Everything else that he's done is a scramble or a sack or a throwaway. He has done 15 designed rush attempts, second most among quarterbacks this year. Only 5 of them have been successful, though. So I think in the designed run game, he's not actually contributing that much. Where he is doing a lot is with his scrambling. He has 11 scrambles, are tied for the most in the NFL. Here's the yardage on his 11 scrambles: 4, 9, 17, 16, 12, 11, 8, 9, 14, 9. It's his chunk yardage every time. So I think that's what you've got to worry about, is you cannot let him get free. You've got to make sure you're not rushing up the field. You've got to play that sort of contain rush where you're not letting him get outside the pocket. I think that's what you've got to worry about, at least from the offensive side of the ball. On defense, it's just hard to get too concerned about this Washington defense, man. They just don't have a lot of talent. I think the interior is still strong with Jonathan Allen. They've got Daron Payne. They've got, Johnny Newton, who was a Bengals fan favorite going into the draft. But this secondary is just really, really rough. Emmanuel Forbes, their first-round pick last year, has not played well, and he's now injured. Benjamin St. Juste, their other corner, gave up more yardage last season than any other corner in the league. Their safeties have been a problem. It doesn't look great. A Dan Quinn defense is never going to be the most organized or structured unit, really. That's not really what they do. They kind of always fly at the ball, but that kind of worked in Dallas, I think, when he had a lot more talent. When you don't have the talent and you're playing kind of that undisciplined, organized style of defense, I think it kind of looks like this. And I would be surprised if the Bengals don't put up quite a few points on Sunday.
Yeah. And you've got another possibility for another big Gesicki game, because Mike Sanders still is their nickel slot. He's a rookie. Game 3, I think Gesicki could exploit him, and I do. I thought they did a decent job, their corners, of tackling the Giants. Now, Neighbors got loose for some yak on a couple plays, but I thought they did a good job of getting guys down once the completions were made and not giving explosives like that. And I thought St. Juste played pretty well in that game. And I guess Emmanuel Forbes could come back. I don't know where that stands.
I'm not sure if he's going to play this week or not. But yeah, they've got Michael Davis, who's a former Chargers starter, who would probably start if he can't play. But yeah, it's not a great secondary, and it's. Last week, they played Daniel Jones at quarterback. It's a different ball game playing against Joe Burrow, I think, and especially against these receivers. The Giants have Malik Neighbors, but they don't have much beyond Tim. So I think especially if T can come back, give the Commanders more to look at in terms of options, I really do think this is going to be a big offensive day for the Bengals. Yeah,
and a big day for Volson and that interior of the line. I mean, that's what you mentioned. They don't have great edge rushers, but they are really strong up the middle with Payne and Allen. And, Allen, PTSD for a lot of Bengals. He's the one that hit Joe Burrow and tore the ACL back in 2020. And so that's always a guy that you need to look out for. So big day for Ted. for Kappa, for Volson. Need to keep moving forward with that offensive line, and it may not feel as tough as going against a Chris Jones, but they're still going to have their hands full.
So I don't know about you, Jay. I'm projecting an easy win here. I mean, I think the talent gap is too big. Unfortunately, those are the same words I think I said going into week 1, and we know how that turned out. I do think that this Commanders team is probably, just from a talent standpoint, one of the worst in the NFL. I'm expecting a big, I don't want to say blowout, but I'm expecting a pretty big win here. I think if that doesn't happen, it'll be time to sound the alarm bells, obviously. I think if they go to 0-3, we've got real problems to talk about, obviously. If they win this game and it's closer, and if it's tight, if it's not a pretty big victory, I still think we'll have a lot to talk about, because I think this is the type of team the Bengals should be able to put away pretty easily. So I'm projecting a pretty easy win, but, fingers crossed.
I mean, they're undefeated on Ring of Honor night, so there you go. That's
there you go.
What better stat you want than that? I could see it being both ways. I could see this being a 2-score game most of the way, and then an oh, by the way, touchdown by Washington at the end makes it a little bit closer. But yeah, I think that more than likely Washington's going to keep this close, and it's, if you're betting the line, you might be sweating. I know you're saying you think that they'll score a lot and it'll be more of a blowout, but I just don't trust it. Remember last year they were 0-2, and it was that kind of that gotta have it game against the Rams, and they won, but it wasn't pretty. And different scenario. Joe Burrow was still dealing with he had retweaked it in that Baltimore game in week 2, so he was feeling it again in week 3 against the Rams. But I think next week 4 down at Carolina is when it can all come together and look like the way we all think it's going to look. I think this is going to be a bit more of a slog than people are expecting.
We shall see. It's going to be an exciting game. And then week 4, Andy Dalton, man, versus Andy Dalton. I almost can't believe it that it's actually going to happen. But I am excited to watch both these next weeks.
What about Andy against Marvin this week?
Oh my God,
Carolina,
it's incredible.
And then he gets to go against Zach the following week. I mean, just talk about timing. Do we want to go with scores? Do we want to do predicting scores for this game?
Why don't you? Well, yeah, go. Why don't you go ahead? Let me.
So I'm going 28-23 Bengals. I think they'll score quite a bit. 4 touchdowns. And again, I don't know how that 23 happens with Washington. Maybe it's a back and forth game, and Burrow throws a touchdown pass with a minute to go to win it. Or like I said, maybe they're up 28-16 and Washington drives down and gets an oh, by the way, touchdown. But that's going to be my final, 28-23.
Okay, I'll go a little more disparate in the scores here. I'm gonna say 30-14. I'm gonna go with a pretty big win. I just don't think this Washington defense is very good. I think this is kind of the game where it does come together, and maybe it doesn't. I could see all your points, Jay. I think that maybe they could struggle again. I would not be surprised. Nothing surprises me with the Bengals in these early season games at this point. But I do think this is a team where they can pretty much have their way on offense. Don't have a lot of threats on to worry about on defense. I just think this is a game where it's going to look really good for the Bengals. So I'll go 30-14. We'll see who's closer when we come back next week. Everyone enjoy this week 3 game. Hopefully the Bengals are 1-2 by the end of the weekend. We'll talk to you next week.